Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Vance Kite, and they often say that the best teachers are also the best thieves. So I'm going to steal the polling idea that has been used several times thus far. To my teachers out there, or former teachers, how many of you have had less than excellent leadership in your school? Any school you've been in? All right, that would be most. Of those of you who either are or were in the classroom, how many of you have considered leaving the classroom in all or part because of things your administration has done? Okay, so for those of you who aren't in the classroom, you saw those hands go up by virtue of the fact that they are in this room that identifies them as some of the best teachers in the state, and you are at risk of losing them as a result of administration. If you look at my bio, I was a teacher in Durham Public Schools. I was highly decorated. I am no longer a teacher, in part because of my administration, also in part because of the advanced roles conversation that we had earlier. I'm excited today to have a conversation with Glasher Robinson and Representative Hugh Blackwell about the Transforming Principal Preparation Program, or TP3. So I want to kick it off by asking Representative Blackwell, why is principal preparation so critical for North Carolina students and teachers?
Well, the hands that went up a little while ago, I think, are a practical illustration of why it's important. We're not doing what we need to do for our students. Something needs to change, and that change, I think, generally has to be supervised, instigated, managed, and facilitated by leaders. I don't know at this point how far you want me to go in terms of how I got interested in this topic, but if now or later, but...
We'll get to that in just a moment.
Okay.
So, Ms. Robinson, can you tell me how a high-quality school leader can remove barriers to teachers doing their job of teaching?
So that is a lot of what was taught to us, or really for us to reflect upon in the program. So I was fortunate enough to participate in the High Point University Leadership Academy as part of the first cohort. And so that is, in it itself, is the job of a school leader, is to solve problems. And so what I'm learning to do as an assistant principal is really to take the time to talk with the teachers, to really try to figure out what the problem is and trying to get the teachers to be a part of the solution. So it's one thing to be able to tell you what to do and how to resolve the problem, but that still might not honestly satisfy the solution that you feel like would best fit that particular problem. So I think as far as teacher autonomy, it's important to make sure that your stakeholders are part of the conversation, especially because that is the problem that you're identifying, it's the problem that you're bringing forth. So if you can be a part of the conversation, then often everybody leaves the table feeling a lot better about what the next steps are going to be.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Representative Blackwell, this is your chance. You've been an advocate for TP3 in the legislature, so what led you to focus on principals? We'll take that as part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, can you compare and contrast TP3 with other principal preparation programs in the state?
I may mix the answer up.
Excellent.
With both, but I, like Representative Horn, I'm not an educator, but I've been dealing with or involved with education policy for probably about 30 years. I was on the school board at home for 8 years. I was on the board of trustees at the community college for 8 years. And I've been in the legislature involved with education policy and appropriations for the last 10 years. So I think, to try to do this succinctly, a formative experience that I had was on the school board at home. I became an advocate for a reduced class size program, 1 to 15, one teacher, 15 students, no TA, for all of our first, second, and third grades. What I think I learned from that experience was that it worked very well when the superintendent and the initial principals who were committed to and prepared to implement that program so that it wasn't just smaller class sizes, it's what you do with a smaller class size. And they did a great job, and we got great results. When the superintendent changed, and the director of elementary ed that had sort of supervised that program, when he was basically encouraged to leave by the new superintendent over totally unrelated issues, what I observed was that the program began to go backwards. That we simply weren't. Nobody was, from a leadership perspective, was monitoring it. If I fast forward, especially since I've been in the legislature, I've had the opportunity to attend a fair number of conferences on education issues over the last 10 years with the National Conference of State Legislators, Southern Regional Education Board. Always got lots of presentations on what's working and what's a great idea. And what I have continued to observe is that the successful programs tend to be successful when they've got great leadership. So I have become an advocate that the program is not nearly as important, maybe, or is only as important as the leadership is strong and can be maintained and sustained. And you got to plan for succession of leaders. The T3P program is important, I think, for a lot of its features if we can maintain the accuracy of the program. Accuracy is not the word I'm really looking for, but faithfulness to the standards that it was set up with. One, it's research-based. We tried to, I say we, largely I can give credit to Best NC for helping get this work pulled together. Identified characteristics that you can identify in people who are interested in going into school leadership that can be associated in a very positive way with being successful for students that they then work with in buildings with teachers who are teaching those kids, and especially in low income and low performing schools. Part of the model is to use a rigorous selection process. Everybody doesn't get in. In most of our schools of education that have principal certificateships programs, they have a 100% acceptance rate. You pay your tuition, you get your certificate, and if you show up. In the T3P program, you've got to make the cut, and I think the highest acceptance rate that any one of the programs had was probably somewhere around 56% or something like that. I think that's an important feature. Everybody that would like to be a principal in their mind is not really equipped to be a principal. And so there has to be that process that goes on. Another important piece was to insist that this program contain significant mentoring with successful principals, not just somebody who agreed to mentor for a small stipend, but somebody who had also been rigorously selected for their qualities that they had actually put to work over years as a principal. And so there's a mentorship piece, there's a paid in-service work, there's the desire, Glasher was telling me earlier about ending up with her master's and not just with the principal's certificate, and that has been sort of a desire of, I would say, ours as a part of the program. And there are a number of other features. The one I will mention and then be quiet is to have partnerships with local school districts so that the School of Education, rather than just turning out principals, is actually turning out a principal that is going to be hopefully well suited to the needs of schools in the districts with which the preparation program is partnering.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson, to you, what attracted you to the program, and which experiences in the program were particularly impactful for you as you have just assumed your first role as an AP?
So I was actually at a point in my career where I was ready to transition out of the classroom. I had actually already started my graduate school applications and looking into doctoral programs. And so it just happened to be that as teachers, we get a bunch of emails, and we don't always get the opportunity to read all of them, but one of the ones I actually did get to read was the opportunity to apply for the cohort opportunity. And so it was a very quick turnaround process. So our applications were due October 31st. We were interviewing the first round on election day that year. So it went from, I think I was told maybe about 200 people applied to about 50 people for the first round of interviews. Then from the first round of interviews, we were then selected down to 14 for the opportunity to interview at High Point University. And so we also did have to apply to High Point University and actually be accepted as well. And then from there, we were selected from Guilford County down to 5 in the first cohort. So that part was very competitive. It was a combination of a data analysis session, a one-on-one interview session, as well as like a project analysis kind of thing. So problem solving, if this is a scenario, like what would you do? And so I think I was very pleasantly surprised to have been selected amongst all the people that you get to see. And so I do think that each county that participates in the programs do then identify tailor-fit leaders for their school systems. And so with the whole goal of everybody leaving the programs to become transformational leaders. And so what you start to realize as you're doing your internships is what a transformational leader looks like in a school building is different school to school. And so the needs of your school are very different. And so you start to learn how to advocate for your school, how to advocate for the needs of your students. And so the top, if I could say, top 5 things that I learned from my program are 1, instructional leadership. So High Point had the foresight to allow us to work with Dr. Raymond Jones. And so Dr. Raymond Jones really shifted our mindset of what it means to be an educator. What does it mean to identify what students are learning? What does a lesson look like? And so we also talked about equity leadership, which again goes back to being able to advocate for what you need. And so that's especially important when you're working in high needs environments. And so along with that, going into distributive leadership, no school leader can ever do everything yourself. So ultimately you are tasked with being responsible for the execution of things, but by no means are you the one getting everything done. So then going through and figuring out who has the strengths and the areas that you're looking for to most efficiently get it done, because there are deadlines, there are still people to answer to. And I would say along with that, then we spend a lot of time talking about shifting the culture and making some changes with the micro-political aspect. So when you're coming into schools, especially high need schools, honestly, a lot of the staff members, if they've been there for a while, they're used to leadership changing. So you coming in and figuring out in a delicate way what has already been done, what the current needs are, what are you going to do differently, and then how do you have the finesse to then deliver that information to your staff members who's, as they say, who are your low-hanging fruit people who they're already natural leaders in the building. And so they already have other people who are looking to them to figure out what to do. So you can identify those people, and then you kind of have those conversations. Again, your stakeholders, you need both to identify student leaders. So no matter at what level, from elementary to high school, you have student leaders in the building. Your parents, so parents can be your worst advocates and they can be your best advocates. So you definitely want to make sure that you have those conversations with parents. You don't want to leave them out of the conversation. And then again, going back to your staff and figuring out the best way to support your staff. And so I'm fortunate enough to have worked internships through my program in high needs environments. So it very much matches where I am. And so when I was at Allen Middle School under Dr. Gorham, I happened to be interning when they were short of being the assistant principal. So a lot of things that I was doing was the role of an assistant principal. And the same thing as I transitioned to being an intern at Hairston Middle School. And I was fortunate enough to be hired as the assistant principal at Hairston. But you have to be able to hit the ground running. So probably what was more unfortunate on my part as far as the onboarding process, it was not a lot of time to kind of onboard because the needs are there. People are waiting, kids need things, students need to be successful. So you have to be prepared to just kind of jump in, and you're kind of figuring out things as you go, but I think I would have not been able to do that successfully without having gone through the transformational principal program.
Excellent. Representative Blackwell, so this year we've got 120 participants in TP3 programs. What is your vision for the future of TP3?
Try to organize my answer a little bit. Maybe four things I'll mention. One is when we set the program up, I was a strong advocate for, and this was also a direct result of the experience that I had at home when we worked with an organization called SERVE, which is associated with UNCG, that does educational research. When we set up the program at home, we set up a research piece, so we had cohorts of students that were in the small classes and kids that were not, so that we could try to assess whether being in the small classes with the different delivery of instruction, whether that really made a difference. I'll talk to you another day about what the results were, except to say that I think they were very positive. In any event, we set up the T3P program with a research component that is supposed to be ongoing. So the first part of my vision is to look at that and to say, what do we need to tweak? What do we need to change? Is it actually working? Or is it just something that sounds good and we've done a great job of promoting it, but it really is not making any difference for kids? So I think that's point number one. Point number two is that I have been a strong advocate along the same lines of recognizing what I consider to be the central critical role of leadership in the buildings for raising principal pay. And I think we need to continue to do that just so we can try to attract more people with the kinds of skills that we need who have other options available to them. There's nothing immoral or lessen about your character that you are concerned about how you're going to live and support a family and that kind of thing. So I think that's point number two. Three, I think we need to do something with superintendents and school board members to get them to understand the new way of looking at leadership so that they support it rather than putting conflicting demands on the principals that interfere with instructional leadership issues. And then the final thing that I will mention is about to slip my mind, Glasher. Maybe it's because you hold up that sign that we need to start asking questions. I'm going to blame you for my loss of that thought. Maybe I'll work it into my answer on something else.
Well, then let's take that point and go to the audience. Audience, what questions do you have for either Ms. Robinson or Representative Blackwell?
Actually, I thought of what it was.
Well,
Let me go ahead and say it since they paused.
Go for it.
They gave me an opening. The other thing that we need to address is you can't replace the entire principal workforce overnight. And we've got serious issues of kids that are in the pipeline as well as principals who've got 5, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. I dare say, I hope I'm not going to shock anybody, that all of the people who are principals now might not have been selected if we were using this rigorous selection process. Your hands that you held up at the beginning might be a reflection of that. But there are people in the principalships who would maybe qualify, and we probably need to identify those principals, some of them, and bring them back in for some retraining and rethinking about how you do this, because so many of them were trained to manage buildings and people and not to understand and to facilitate instruction and student learning.
Excellent. Now you all have had a chance to think. What questions do you have? Yes, in the back.
Gotta hold it down. Sorry. Okay, now you can hear me. Woo. It's a successful program. You want to move forward. What's being done? What steps need to be taken to expand the program so that we can have more effective administrators who are so important in the school setting?
Well, it goes back to, I think, what I was saying. We need to be sure it's working well. We're getting some good publicity, but that's from the people who are in the programs and the people who are running the programs. They all like what they are doing and the experiences they're having. But the question is, are students going to be doing better in the schools where these principals go to? So before we go just try to, as people like to say, go to scale, I think we need to consider that everybody that wants to be a principal shouldn't be, and we don't need to worry about rushing it. Let's get it right. And maybe in terms of expanding it, do what I said at the end when I finally remembered my fourth point, and that is identify some principals who are out there and are going to be in the system for another 5, 10, 15, 20 years, bring them back in for some of the training that maybe they didn't get. That would be my approach, as well as paying them more.
Further questions from the audience? Yes.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Okay, that's great. Hi, my name is Caroline Harris, and I just had a question about when you're talking about wanting to make sure this is an effective program and that it's trickling down to students. How do you know if it's trickling down to students? Is there a working model that's looking at that, and what are the indicators that you're looking at to know if that trickle-down effect is actually working?
I have not seen that, but when we set it up, there was a requirement, and there's money in the budget for an independent research group to be hired. Such a group was hired, and they are developing and have been working on the measures that they're going to use. I don't know that we've not put any stamp of approval on it. I think I saw some preliminary data on it, but the first cohort that have finished are just getting out into the schools, so it's too early really to have much feedback other than surveys among the students getting the principalship certificates, and maybe among faculty, and like, how do you think it went, and do you think you'll be able to do this, and that sort of stuff, which I don't care much for myself. I mean, it's nice, but I think it's going to be a little while before we have student results.
Before we run out of time, and I just got my wrap-up sign, I'm going to give the last word to you, Ms. Robinson. Give your 30-second to 1-minute pitch for the TP3 program.
So definitely a different look at leadership within education and how to impact students. So this was an opportunity to eventually come out the classroom. I was able to transition slowly. So we were starting off as both full-time teachers and full-time students. And then we were able to transition into our full-time internship. This program was paid for. The only thing that we had to pay for were our books themselves. So we took educational leave, but we were still paid our salary through our internship. So the internship itself is what gives you the confidence to be able to step into a role as far as assistant principal and be able to implement very quickly the same things that you're learning in the program. So we were fortunate enough to have an executive coach who helped us along the way. So even when we have questions in our internship, and even now, once we're hired, we can call them and say, this is kind of what I'm looking at, this is my problem, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? Because these are individuals who have already served in this role successfully.
Thank you. Well, everybody, please join me in thanking Representative Blackwell and Ms. Robinson for their time.